all is now set for us to get into today's episode, or should I say, is today's edition of Power Solutions. Well, every Monday at this time on this radio station, or we get to bring you a conversation about renewable energy, power, especially the key players in the off-grid sector. Well, week in, week out, we get to bring these key players. We talk about topics that have to do with how we can find solutions to the biggest problem that our nation, and indeed our continent, is dealing with, and that's the availability of clean energy, as it were, or the lack of it, if you like. Welcome, indeed, to Power Solutions today. Like you already know, the show is powered by Nigeria Info in partnership with the energy investment company, All On. All On is ably represented today by the communications officer that's talking about Wisdom Chapp-Jumbo, who is acting as my co-host today on the show. Wisdom, how are you?
Hi, Collins. Good morning. Good morning, Nigeria. Good morning.
Fantastic. Monetizing carbon offsets in Nigeria. I repeat that. Monetizing carbon offsets in Nigeria is our focus today. And I'll let Wisdom bring our guests to the microphone, who's joining us virtually. So it's a hybrid show. We are here, and our guest is on the other side. It's virtual physical connection. I mean, that's our world these days, right?
Of course. I know we've been doing this for the last 2 years, and I think we're used to it. Anyways, so today we're having a very interesting conversation, and you should grab your seats and listen closely. This one is very, very important. Our guest today is Karim Jabbar, PhD. Yes, he's a co-founder and CEO of Solstroem. I hope I got that correctly. And he's speaking to us today from Denmark.
Hello, Collins. Hello, Wisdom. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yes, good to see you.
Thanks for inviting me.
Yes, good to see you.
Yes, indeed. So we hit the ground running now. We'll kickstart with the very first question, which has to do with, you like to see yourself as an entrepreneur, a technologist, and educator or an academic. Tell us more about your professional background and journey, if you like.
Okay, sure. Actually, like everybody, my journey was not, as planned. You always start on a path, and then it moves in different directions.
Yeah.
And the same you could say of myself. So I actually grew up on the African continent, but north of you guys in Morocco. My father's Moroccan, my mother's here from Denmark, and now I've landed here in Europe. As part of my studies, I actually wanted to close ties with, you could say, the developing part of the world. So I actually studied development studies, economics, international business, and I did a master's degree from the business school here in Copenhagen. And I ended up working for a while in Benin and Cotonou, where I was working for the European Commission, did a little bit of other ODA type of work, after which I decided that the private sector was probably more for me. I essentially went into the most private of private sectors, you could say, so the tourism industry for a while, running safari tours in East Africa and Southern Africa, and finally finding my way into technology. So I did a PhD in computer science with a focus on distributed ledgers and blockchain technology, which was kind of emergent at the time when I started studying this. So that's a bit of the pathway, and in the connection of this, what I'm currently doing is essentially putting together the dots and the pieces, essentially leveraging technology in order to enable more, you could say, flow of financial flows between the parts of the world that actually need to do a lot of climate action, and the part of the world that actually also needs a lot of revenues from climate finance. So you could say the bits and pieces got aligned intuitively over time.
Interesting. Really, you took that out of my mouth. Interesting. I read about you when we're preparing for this program, and I must say you have an amazing professional journey. And I was amazed at all the many things you've done. But one of it is starting Solstroem in 2018. Tell us a little bit, give us some insight into what you do. Is this like a program or a project, or is it a fully operational company? Tell us more.
It's a very relevant question because at the end of the day, it's a bit of everything. So you could say it is definitely a company. So it's a fully fledged company incorporated here in Denmark, technology based, essentially a software company. So what we do is we create an infrastructure, if you like, that allows for the automated and data-driven generation of carbon credits. So essentially ensuring that when somebody buys a carbon offset credit, which I'll gladly explain a bit more about what that actually is, to ensure that it's actually a correct credit, that it has been generated in a transparent and traceable fashion, and that it's actually, there's no double counting or double spending involved when you actually buy such a credit. So you wouldn't end up in a situation where you could buy a credit and later on the seller would then sell the same credit to somebody else, which could essentially become an issue and is one of the weaknesses of the established carbon system as we have it today. But it's also a program in the sense that there is an underlying program for off-grid solar companies that can join this program. And by joining the program, they automatically join a platform as well, which then issues those credits on their behalf, allowing them to monetize them as they sell them on the international voluntary carbon market.
In the introductory comments, I said that we will be focusing on monetizing carbon offsets. And I'm sure a lot of people were like, okay, what do you mean by carbon offsets? Well, I knew this time would come. So this is the right time to ask before we get into talking about monetizing carbon offsets. Can you explain in detail what are carbon offsets?
Or maybe carbon credits, as I would say.
Yes. Absolutely, Colin. So and it's one of those questions where we need to be careful about asking in details because you could talk for a long time about this. I'll try to keep it simple.
Yes, please do. Please do.
Essentially, in a nutshell, the logic behind it is that we're trying to avoid the temperature rise above 1.5 degrees Celsius, according to the IPCC and so on.
Yeah.
And there's a global understanding that that's where it's going.
Yeah.
So we need to curb our emissions. And the logic here is that a ton of CO2 emitted does not really care about geography and countries. So wherever it's emitted is a bad thing, and wherever it's avoided or sequestrated is a good thing. So essentially, a credit is essentially a balance mechanism whereby you would be an emitter. Let's say a factory here in Europe that emits a lot of CO2. In order to compensate for this, you would essentially purchase a credit for a similar amount of savings somewhere else. So essentially an avoidance of CO2 from being emitted or a sequestration. So it could either be a forestry project, for example, that sequestrates the CO2, or it could be an avoidance, as in the case of renewable energy, whereby when you purchase a solar home system, for example, you're not using a kerosene lamp or a diesel genset, and by replacing it, you're actually avoiding an emission. And that has to be scientifically measured, and you need to make sure that it's the correct number that essentially makes up the credit as you purchase it.
Wow. Yeah, Collins,
that's deep. We've talked to different kind of experts in this sector, and that's yet another one.
I think it's another area we need to break a little more. Maybe as we go on in the conversation, there will be so many questions we'll be asking. But the one I want to ask now is: now your company is working to make the carbon market smarter, trusted, and more automated. Now, if you look at the explanation you just gave, what you're doing is you look into that market, making it more smarter, trusted, automated, and do all those processing to get those carbon credits. But so now, how do you achieve this? You know, there's a lot of things we are putting together, but how do you really achieve this? Can you tell us?
Yes, absolutely. So as I mentioned, the challenge is to ensure that the numbers that you report, so essentially the numbers that make up a carbon credit, is actually correct. So for example, if I purchase a solar home system on a payment plan from a distributor in Nigeria, It replaces some kerosene lamps. It replaces a genset maybe. How do I quantify how much has actually been, removed? So in order to do that, you would need to apply an established methodology, and there is a number of those. But the way we're actually doing it is to ensure that data drives this process. So it's not a process where you do a bulk calculation to estimate how much over a lifetime could a potential solar home system replace or avoid emissions. We're actually doing it live as it actually takes place. So by getting data from that actual solar home system, we know for a fact whether it's on or off, meaning whenever it's on, we can assume that it's not that kerosene lamps are not being used, for example. Whereas if it's off, we assume, well, since it's shut down now, the people who are living there must have reverted to a fossil fuel-based type of setup. So essentially, it's a conservative method of estimating the quantity of CO2 avoidance, but it's done in a way that can be trusted because we can point to the data. So it's a software system, as I said. So we're relying on the work that has already been done by all these great players in Nigeria and across Africa in order to bring access to energy to the most remote areas through small solar home systems that actually are not, very big, as you know. But if you aggregate them, it's a substantial emission reduction that you can actually provide. An analogy that I often use when I talk to people in this part of the world is to say, well, the kerosene lamps across Africa essentially corresponds to 7 times the CO2 emissions of the country of Denmark. So it's actually a lot. But they're so distributed that it becomes very difficult to monitor. Whereas if you monitor them through a software which can be trusted and is correct data that you actually receive, it becomes more straightforward to actually estimate the numbers and put together a program that can bring money flow back to the companies who are doing that.
Okay. Interesting. Earlier today, you are all on and your company. What's the pronunciation? Is this Solstroem? Is that what it's pronounced? Because
Solstroem.
Oh,
yes.
Solstroem. All right, great.
In Danish, it means sun power.
Okay, fantastic, beautiful. So, all on a Solstroem, of course, earlier today signed an investment deal to help monetize carbon offsets, which is our focus today. By the way, congratulations on that.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, can you tell us more about this deal and what you hope to achieve with this?
So all he was just trying to explain before, we are trying to bring it home. So with this deal, I think we are bringing it home. But let me allow him to give further explanation of the deal.
Yes. So what we're trying to do here is to essentially further scale what we've already done. So this company is already active. So we have a few solar companies that we're working with in Latin America, and we're also working with some of the larger solar distributors in Africa. For example, MG Energy Access, and as well Sun King, Greenlight Planet, they're also known as, and a number of other players. But currently, we actually see a great potential in West Africa and in Nigeria in particular, as the potential for renewable energy is tremendous, and it's a market that is still under development. And in order to accelerate what is actually needed, all kinds of additional revenue streams would make sense. So therefore, deploying such a solution into the Nigerian market or bringing it home, as Wisdom says, is essentially what we're going to spend part of the proceeds that we have received from this investment to actually fulfill. So the plan is for us to start engaging with more companies that are active in Nigeria, and essentially work with them in order to get digital data transfers from their respective off-grid operations, so that we can issue these credits and monetize them in a way that actually generates this additional revenue stream that is needed.
Impressive. And Collins, just to know, we at All On, we are really thrilled about this partnership, and which supports the development of this platform by Solstroem, and that will enable micro carbon credits in everyday activity. And now All On is also taking a chance on an innovative business model which could prove transformative and creative, hard currency revenue generating opportunities for Nigeria renewable energy companies. I mean, if you are a player in this sector and you're listening to this show, you should also be thrilled, because this will do a lot for the sector. Most sincerely, to do a lot for the sector.
Yes, indeed. Our fingers are crossed also to see, and with all hopes high. It sounds very, very interesting. Looks there's going to be. Now, we understand that this deal will create hard currency revenue generating opportunities for Nigerian, especially specifically those in the renewable energy companies. Now, can you explain this in details? Because, I love the key word in everything I said there right now is the word opportunities. All right. So let's have in detail. Could you explain this so that my average listener there would understand the opportunities in this, especially those in the renewable energy companies?
Well, as it stands right now, most renewable energy companies that are, you could say, below a certain scale have a very, very hard time accessing this carbon market. And the reason for this is that the methodologies and the standards and the ways you actually create a carbon credit today requires an engagement with consultants. It requires an engagement with standards who essentially will take an upfront fee in order for them to develop the credits for you. And then there's going to be an issuance fee, a registry fee, and so on, which means that smaller companies really don't have the cash flow to actually put that money up front and wait for a couple of years for the credits to be generated. So you can say from a business model perspective, this is also, we think, kind of innovative because it's not just the technologies, the business model behind it that actually opens up the opportunity. And in this particular case, what it does is that it allows smaller players to, you could say, aggregate forces through the platform. So it means that we're essentially handling the whole process of verification. We have set up the methodology as a program of activity. We have codified a system. And the only thing, so to speak, that solar companies need to do is to have sound data that they already have, because they need that in order to monitor their systems. We need to get that transfer. Once we get the transfer, everything gets done without any fees up front. Only later, once the carbon credits sell from the registry, there's a revenue share whereby we take our cut for all the work we've put into it, and there is a flow of capital to the providers, to the solar companies who have done all the hard work at the end of the day. So this allows them with very little upfront cost, other than the man hours of just working a bit on the tech side, to actually access a market that otherwise is completely inaccessible to them. So that is, the nature of the opportunity.
Okay, impressive. Now, another angle I want to come on this is so these carbon credits issued on your platform are fully traceable and calculated on basis of an established UN Clean Development Mechanism methodology. This is a mouthful, but we understand that this mechanism is seen by many as a trailblazer. So it means that it is truly working. So now, but can you tell us or take us through major highlights of this mechanism and how it exactly would work?
The mechanism itself is well established, because it's probably the setup that has created most carbon methodologies over time, and it's driven by the UN. So therefore, it has a very broad, open stakeholder consultancy type of approach. It must be said that UN CDM is not the only standard. You would have other standards such as the gold standard and verified carbon standard, and a number of other standards that equally will develop their own methodologies. Some of them will be taken from the UN CDM, such as we do, and they appropriated into their own setup. But what actually, you could say, makes it more trustworthy in a sense is that it's that all the interest of various stakeholders have been taken into consideration. So in a nutshell, to keep it simple, that means that when we say X amounts of watt hours per day have been received by us as a data transfer for a given solar home system, we apply a carbon methodology that basically transforms that value to a carbon value. The calculation itself, the formula itself, is underwritten by a stringent procedure whereby it has taken a number of years before this methodology was developed by actors such as the World Bank and other development institutions in consultation.
On the mechanism.
Yes. And therefore, it is not us as a company that have made up the calculations, which is, a component of that element of trust. What should be added as well is that not only are we applying this methodology, but we're also getting it verified or audited by a third party, which is also an important trust factor. So here we're working with the Norwegian company called DNV, which is one of the largest ISO certifying bodies in the world. And they essentially do an audit on us every year where they check out the code and the data transfer, the methodology that we use to ensure that we're actually doing that in a correct fashion. So all these components together hopefully put together a very robust program, which at the same time can be done in a cost-effective way so that smaller off-grid installations can also benefit from this.
Just to ask, can you tell us your assessment of the renewable energy sector as of today? I know you've heard a lot about it. You've worked with players in the sector. Now, looking at where this is coming from, do you have an assessment of what the sector looks like now? To accept the acceptance level of this now.
Yeah, well, the sector, I think, is getting very mature for these types of data, solutions. And they're where if you go back, some years, particularly in small scale, pico scale solar home systems, it was a whole different business. It was a business of cash sales of very small units that were deployed, and you basically don't really know what happens to them. Whereas today, all the bigger distributors and players are aware of the fact that data is gold. You need to know your customers. You need to ensure that you can upsell to your customers in order to allow them to climb up the energy ladder. So it's not just about light. It's also about health. It's also about education, access to credit, and so on and so forth. And that can only be done if you can quantify, a person's ability, for example, to pay off on a payment plan, gives them credibility so they can take a loan and use that as a collateral, and so on and so forth. So those mechanisms are being explored, and we're just tapping into that movement, which tells us that if it's possible to do all those things, we can also use that same data flow to generate carbon credits.
Our time is fast spent, and we'll be, wrapping up in just a moment. I don't know if it would be right to say that since it's your introductory radio conversation, especially for mainstream media from this part of the world, it would be great to know, you could tell us briefly now, about some of your projects within Nigeria and Africa.
Okay, so currently we work with, we actually don't have any live companies from Nigeria, which is also, as I mentioned before, it's a big market of opportunities, and we're actually really looking forward to using some of the proceeds of this to actually generate more. What we do have is more on East Africa. We have projects in Rwanda with a company called Zola Electric, and projects in Kenya with NG Energy Access, which is the large French utility that some years back bought up Mobisol, which was one of the pioneers in the space. And currently they are running this with minigrids as well. And the plan is that we essentially will be working with them in order to scale the solution for their providers and their setups. We do a similar type of setup with Green Light Planet, and we have a whole pipeline of distributors that we're working with, trying to get on board as fast as possible. The important thing to notice here is that it does not take 2 to 3 years for you to issue those credits if you're a solar company. The process is more 2 to 3 months. We still have a level of diligence that needs to be put in place. We need to know which company we're talking to. There's some documentation that needs to be handed over, and there's some technical component which is on the light end of things. So in order to facilitate this, we're just as a side note, we also have a project going with Power Africa, where we are delivering technical assistance to some of the companies in the sector in order to identify the good matches to actually be able to join such a type of setup, or at least inform them about what the options are when it comes to carbon.
Great.
Beautiful, interesting, very, very interesting. Elder Wisdom's got another question as we wrap up.
No, not really another question. Time is far spent, but you want to agree with me that this is a conversation that 30 minutes doesn't seem like it's enough to have.
We might need to have him come again.
Yes, we need to break this furthermore, and also make the audience and players in the sector understand, how they can benefit from all of this. For us at All On, this is what we do: enable more finance for the sector, enable the environment, to open up for more players and stakeholders to get more from the sector. And this is one of it. We are really thrilled about this investment deal. You can read more on our website about this deal just to understand and get more details. www.all-on.com, or just find us on any of our social media platforms, All On Energy Instagram, All On Energy Twitter, All On LinkedIn, and then All On Energy on Facebook. So we can learn more and send us messages if you want to know more about this deal. But very exciting.
Very, 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 very. We must say a big thank you to our guests. How do we say we'll do this again in not in English now? I mean, you're reaching us from Denmark, right? Yeah, in Danish,
Yes.
absolutely. How do you say we'll do this again? I want to learn that.
Let us gøre det igen. Let's do it again.
Okay.
Let us gøre det igen.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
It's a deal.
It's a deal.
Just let us know. It's a deal, Collins.
Fantastic. Beautiful. Thank you so much for being a part of the show today. We say thank you indeed, and have yourself a splendid rest of the hours you've got over there. Okay. Wisdom, what a conversation that was.
It was.
Indeed.
Yes, very interesting. I love it. I love the angle. I love what this deal is going to do.
I mean, it's very creative, It's very creative.
Very creative.
Do you think it will take a lot of people a long time to understand it, or
like he said, the sector is matured now, and we have grown from where we used to be before. So some of these things we're catching up pretty fast.
All right, Nigeria, that's it. We have come to the end of this episode of Power Solutions. And of course, we talked about monetizing carbon offsets in Nigeria. If you didn't learn anything, you learned what carbon offsets are. You also learned the opportunities available, brought to you by All On and Solstroem, who CEO Karim Jabbar, PhD, we spoke to, CEO and co-founder, we spoke to on the show today. And Wisdom, it's been a pleasure to have you as a co-host on the show today.
Thank you, Collins. Always a pleasure.
Fantastic. Okay, that's it. It's over, dog. Go home. Come on. No, don't go home. Stay tuned. The news coming up shortly.
Keeping up the pace in an ever-changing world.
Packet tomato that was being sold 14 naira, they have been increasing effectively. 100 naira.